So I'm gonna do a little intro and we'll just fuck around.
Stunning.
Okay, amazing. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of The Mothers. Holy shit, I have the tingles. It's been a long time coming. But I'm Sara Brown. I'm a recovering Google executive, a former pro soccer player, a mother of three who are 10, 8, and 3, get to 4, get to 5.
Wow.
Joined by the amazing Veronica Wolanin, as we
That's
like
me.
say, only
me.
known as V, who by some miracle was our very first nanny and really held me and our whole family and our children together in what is the all-consuming intensity of raising little babies. So she eventually flew away to LA, spread her wings, moved into corporate America, womp womp, and is now back east and her own amazing little baby who is working on sleeping and might chime in occasionally with thoughts.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like you and I joke about this, but like how to define our relationship today.
Mm.
Because I feel like I think of you as my mother sometimes and my grandmother and my sister and my child.
I was gonna say, you are every generation of relative to me that I could have.
Yes.
I've never had a more dynamic relationship in my life. Question mark?
Yes. An undefinable thing. I also feel like people just aren't friends with people that aren't closer in age anymore, which feels like such a miss.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you're 25 years older than I am. No, I'm just kidding.
Because you're ancient. It's weird.
Yes. No, I am young. You are even younger. Okay, so I also wanted to formally introduce whatever this thing is, currently called The Mothers, and hopefully forever called The Mothers, unless
That's right.
the public raises an alarm. But quick intro, when I started actually thinking about the idea of this podcast, V, you were immediately the one that I was hoping could possibly do this with me. And I'm glad we're here and it's all happening. But what did we all tune into? You millions of listeners out there. What are you?
Right.
What trapped you here? So here's the shortest story that I'm trying to keep organic. I did actually write some notes, so I apologize if this turns into like a moment of storytelling. But I'd been in corporate America for about 20 years, which sounds crazy to the point of me being very young. And I finally took a leap of faith just a few months ago because I had been forever wanting to build something that was my own. I'd also, as we will pick apart, I think, in this podcast, my kids had moved out of the brand new phase. So our youngest was 3 at the time. The others were up to 10. And I think I had started to be able to refocus on what do I want to do professionally with a little less focus on what do I want to do professionally in order to accommodate my children a little bit. Anyways, I finally stepped away, leap of faith. And only once I was out of that corporate environment did I realize how busy I still was without working and how much, therefore, we were actually doing, mothers, fathers, parents of all stripes, but how much we do while working, whether it's like ordering the next size pants, like between a meeting, setting up the doctor's appointments, coordinating play dates, parent teacher conferences, all the stuff. There's always like the things around the edges. And suddenly I was confronted by the fact that like, wow, I'm still busy, even though I don't have a job, and really acknowledging like how much we do, and we do so much. So anyway, so I stepped out of work planning to be fancy free through the summer, which is obviously a very privileged, fortuitous thing. But I quickly realized how much I was still busy. And we even have a nanny. So I'm living this like ultra privileged life, and with all the resources in the world, still realizing that there's work to be done when you have 3 kids or however many kids one might have. So I'm starting to come into more of an awareness of all the great work that parents do on top of often having a day job. Around that same time, I wound up at a Sarah McLachlan concert as part of her Mirror Ball like 30th anniversary tour with my childhood best friend. Sarah was very important to us as we were emo high schoolers. She is now, Sarah, not my friend, is now 50 something. And We were at this concert. She was up on stage, just so beautiful, so charismatic, incredible voice, so confident, singing and talking about her work and her life and her children, like all in the same sentence. And I felt like I hadn't seen that in a female leader before, where their whole life was integrated and all from a position of like strength and awesomeness and, you know, power and emotion and just sort of, I don't know, the audience was obviously very captivated by her for many reasons, but I just found it really moving um, to be in that environment. I kept kind of reflecting on why. And part of it was I came to realize that when I looked around, I didn't really see that version of the motherhood experience reflected back to me, certainly by the media of all flavors, like this fullness and the strength of mothers as women on their own with their own wants, like needs, dreams, frustrations, etc., but are also navigating the reality of raising children and growing from it. And those stories aren't really being told. It's all these like siloed channels by theme. You have media related to parenting, which is for mothers, but it's really about the kids. You have a lot of how do you hack corporate America? How do you possibly climb the corporate ladder while you're a woman? You have dressing as a mother, you have fashion, you know, you have in massive quotes like health and wellness, i.e., like how do you fit in your clothes that you used to wear? And then you have moms who are making a joke out of parenting, which I think is its own form of rebellion and subversiveness. But I also think over time kind of makes it seem like motherhood is all fun and games and jokes. And if that's true, how hard could it really be? So anyway, the idea that motherhood is this ultimate and we're all being and doing all of these things all at once and more. Mothers are the ultimate multitaskers and we're not given the airtime to like bring all of those elements together. And on the occasions where I do see these stories or hear these stories, I often think about I personally feel a ton of relief of kind of just like wow, there's an honest full picture. And I would notice that my friends and colleagues would feel similarly. These are the little pieces that would like kind of go viral in our, you know, my little community of mothers with kids. I often think of the Vogue magazine feature of Serena Williams when she decided to retire and saying specifically, unlike Tom Brady, I have to be pregnant. And then in the pandemic, the New York Times hosted this like primal scream hotline for parents. A lot of mothers in particular just call in and yell and rant like during the pandemic. um, and then I even think of we love artists and singers, but Pink had this awesome documentary about balancing family and performing leading into one of her many global tours. And it really just showed, similar to Sarah McLachlan, like her kids were a part of her and a part of her experience and a part of her creative process and a part of like her power in a way that again is sort of America has this work like you don't have kids like you don't have a job idea. And I think there's that takes away some of the power of what mothers are, which is that we are all of these things. And I've often felt, you know, there are many times absolutely where it's incredibly hard to be a mother, but it's also empowering, especially once you can sleep. um, so anyway, I think the one thing that added some urgency to it was I'd also started to notice that this, like the public discourse around parenthood and motherhood was really shifting quickly into this message of don't have kids. It's terrible, miserable, and literally, thanks to the Surgeon General, like bad for your health. So there were many young adults that I might be around who really, their stories about this and in my personal life, but talking about how they're like, I don't even know if I want to have kids. This seems like a terrible decision, regardless of whether the world is ending from an environmental standpoint. Um, and very much, particularly among the women, we're hearing this story of, well, once you have kids, your life, your identity, your dreams are dead. So achieve everything you want to achieve personally, then have children. So I was just very curious about this idea that motherhood and parenthood kills your personal identity and your career and all this stuff. Because I think it's not exclusively my experience, and I think it doesn't have to be the full experience. And I've also been latching onto this idea of parenting and motherhood is hard. Like, I won't deny that, but it's, I think lately thinking about it in a way that kind of like you break to build, like it breaks you down to build you back to in a better new way. And I think I'm better because of the hard, and it has been empowering, but I also think life is supposed to be hard to a degree. Like the world tries to tell us that like any points of friction in your life should be solved. Like that means there's a problem. But I actually think there's so much that should be happening about life being hard. Otherwise, you're not really living, striving, growing. I think about the League of Their Own moment with Tom Hanks being like, it's the hard that makes it great. I think he was saying it to Gina Davis. I don't remember. Anyway, I think all of the hardness is part of the richness of it all. So rounding out the story, I was trying to think, like, let's find a way to share these stories of these badass women who are also mothers, hear them talk about the impact of motherhood, what it's done for their sense of self, their ambitions, their priorities, their relationship to the world, the hard and the wonderful and the complex. And I'm particularly curious to hear from mothers with kids over 5, because I do think there is a shift that happens as kids become more independent and mothers, as I said initially, this even was happening to me. There becomes a little bit more space for the mom in particular to kind of recreate a sense of independent identity backed by this power of parenthood and more consistent sleep. So that was a lot of the genesis of the mothers. But when I also thought about this with V, who is has nanny experience, so is a professional with children, is a daughter in her own right.
That all goes out the window when you have your own.
True.
You're starting from square one.
Yes, it's a whole other ballgame. But
it is.
You being in the thick of it with a young kid, me being a little bit slowly at least getting one foot out the door of the total new kids.
Yeah.
And then ideally we'd be interviewing these women who might be, 5 to 10 years plus beyond that too. I just thought there was a really important spectrum of perspective because, again, short term it might suck and there's still beauty within the suckiness, but longer term there might be more beauty than suckiness. So I wanted us to be able to kind of reflect and have that, dialogue
I like
over
that.
time. Yeah.
More beauty than suckiness is a good way to put it.
Yes.
One can only hope.
Yeah. Okay. So really quick, what to expect, again, speaking to the millions of listeners. So I think our first episodes are going to really be mostly like just how the sausage is made because we're figuring this podcast thing out. We might look like professional influencers, but we've actually never done this before. So I think we'll certainly be sharing our own reflections on motherhood, like the day-to-day existential / minutia of parenting and life. But I think it'll also focus a lot on just behind the scenes, how we're getting this off the ground, what's working, what's not, what we're learning. We're not all Kylie Kelsey, making it all seem so easy.
Or we might be. We might be just like Kylie Kelsey.
You're right. Take that sausage making away. But over time, our episodes are going to focus mostly on interviews with badass mothers who are kind of like building and creating and finding their own way, a third way possibly, outside of like grinding it out within sort of patriarchal, capitalistic world. But women who are out there like rocking it in their industries and also raising children, whether they're fresh or full grown adults. So dream boarding. But imagine like sit downs with Alanis Morissette or Robin Arzon or Demi Moore or Alex Morgan, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, my absolute hero. Tammy Duckworth and Nancy Pelosi, like all of these legends who are at different stages of parenthood, motherhood, really wanted to hear like, how are they doing this? What have they learned along the way? How did they manage to kind of juggle both? When was that juggling impossible? What did they learn? What was essential? I'm sure within this will come up a lot of issues around childcare and where there's just never enough help, but wanting to hear that rawness, because otherwise we're pretending that we're doing this all on our own. And obviously none of us are. So, and then I'm also curious to hear from like mothers like us, the non-celebs that are also doing it all and raising families and ourselves like all at once. So of course it'll take a minute to like build up to these legends, but we got to manifest that shit. So, and to that point, quick call to our millions of listeners. We want to know whose stories you want to hear too. So nominate future guests. The email address will be in our little Spotify podcast description, but email us at info@themothersmedia.co and would love to hear your recommendations because I know you know a lot of badass mothers out there. Okay. V, I'm taking you off mute.
Do it.
V, testing,
Hi.
testing.
I'm here.
You're juggling it all.
Speaking of.
Yes. I love the crinkle toys. Everyone needs a crinkle toy.
Can you hear the crinkle toys loudly?
It feels like home.
I'm so
I love
sorry.
the crinkle toy. No. It's a beautiful thing.
This is part of it, I guess.
But V and all of us, I feel like at different points, kids will probably like fly across the radar because this is real life. And let's encourage that. Why
One
not?
day when we get more of a structure and schedule, maybe
I
it
know,
won't
when
be
we're doing
such
all
a
the things we should be doing, like the
yeah,
perfect sleep schedule down to the
yeah.
minute, and we're feeding
Once
exactly down to the ounce.
exact
And yeah, that all seems like the right level of aspiration.
and it's fully yeah, it's definitely realistic. I think we're like right there. So I feel pretty good about that. Probably by next week, like I think
Yeah,
we'll be good.
exactly. But to be honest, how many times was I on like a video conference call with bigwigs at wherever companies, and particularly in the pandemic, you know, their children were like wandering around behind us on the screen.
100%.
They
The
were
viral
like
video
bugging them. Oh my God, the viral
of
video.
the
Yes.
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. The woman who, and the mother came and like pulled the child
Bless
out.
her
Everyone was
heart.
like, that's the nanny. And then everyone's like, wait, I'm racist.
Oh, it's me. I'm the problem.
Yes, exactly. Always.
Turns out kids, they're
We're
everywhere.
also, yeah, totally. We're probably going to realize, at least I will speak for myself. I will realize that many times throughout this podcast that I am the problem. So I just want to share that disclaimer. Maybe it's not about society. Maybe it's about me. But yeah. So anywho, our next segment, all because of V. We both watched Nightbitch. Well, V watched it first, and then that made me brave enough to watch it. But quick intro, we wanted to talk about Nightbitch. Nightbitch is a newish movie. I think it went straight to Hulu, but starring Amy Adams, based on a novel. We should always give a shout out to the books behind it, by Rachel Yoder. I was trying to think about how to describe it, so obviously I went to Wikipedia. Wikipedia says, quote, the book is a magical realism style story of a stay-at-home mom who sometimes transforms into a dog.
Sometimes.
And I was like, if that's what I read too, I don't think I would watch this movie. Because obviously it's so much deeper than that.
They don't set it up correctly, in my opinion.
Yes. And actually to go deep right off the bat, I do feel like that's a good challenge of motherhood, especially mothering small children, where it's like, tell me what you did today. And you're like, well,
changed a diaper. I got shit on.
Yes. I maybe took a shower, probably didn't. We went for a walk. And everyone would be like, what the fuck is bad with that? Like, great. Yeah. But like, there's so many layers behind that where you're like, it's not all of motherhood is a magical realism experience.
It never quite feels like you did as much as you think you'd like. I'm always like, I did so much.
Yes. Big day.
When I try to summarize it, I'm like, we took a nap.
Yes.
But
yes.
it really is.
Yes.
It really is.
But it was the 45 minutes that went into whatever happened before the nap even happened. And 100%. Then the 45-minute nap that didn't happen. But while it was happening, you were like anxious that it was happening. Is it happening? Is he still asleep? And yeah, of course, doing 45 loads of laundry. I never did laundry. You're great at a clean home. I'm not as good at that.
For some reason, I have to have control over something. So that's what we have control over right now.
Oh, that's a beautiful choice. Look at you therapizing. Self-soothing.
It is my self-soothing. Turns out vacuuming is my self-soothing.
Yes. Some people suck thumbs. Others vacuum. But okay. So Nightbitch, as I said, I had seen this pop up on the Hulu and was like, this falls into the category of movie that I usually choose to watch, which is deep, meaningful, existential, sad. And then leaves me feeling deeply affected for about 72 hours where I'm like depressed. So I've learned over time that maybe we should not click play, but V said, no, this is a safe one. And maybe you should even, like, it's important that you do watch it given what we're going to be talking about. But was that fair?
100%. I feel like I watched it and have never felt more seen at this stage in my life.
Yes.
Ever.
Yes.
Yeah.
So V made me brave as usual. And I don't know. I feel like from the beginning, it like hit very hard. It was very on the nose. I personally was glad to be watching it many years out from the first years of newbornness. Because I think in that setting, I might have been overly influenced. But
sure,
it's all about fighting for identity as a mother who winds up being a full-time stay-at-home mother, which the movie talks about this. Something that Amy Adams, plays the mother in this film, but something that she agreed to and wanted to find joy in, but also ultimately found it to be really hard. and just very difficult and complicated, and a loss of self, redefining who I am, and all as she's a creative person, she's an artist otherwise, and this idea of suddenly being an artist feeling like a selfish endeavor, which I had talked to you, V, about this when I'm trying to build this whatever podcast and anything else after stepping away from corporate life and thinking this all suddenly feels very selfish and like navel gazing. Is this still worth it? And I think ultimately in this, throughout the movie, is this question of identity and needing to find ways to preserve a little bit of who you are or who you've become, because I think it also talks about this, like the transformative power of becoming a mother.
Yep.
But I had various jotty notes, but I'm curious, I don't know if there's anything top of mind for you, Lady V.
So something I had read that I was like, yes, that is why this resonates. Because part of me watched it and I was like, I don't know what it is. Like, I have an incredible partner who I feel supported by, and my kid really isn't that bad and all these things. So I was like, why does this resonate so deeply? And something that I read was that it is this beautiful and difficult transition into something else. So this metaphor of like this beautiful, difficult transition into parenthood, similar to this beautiful, seemingly odd, but whatever, transition to being a werewolf or whatever. That is how it's like, it is the most incredible, magical, unreal thing. And you love it and you hate it. Like, and not hate it. I don't hate it. That came out weird. Delete that.
Well, I think that I think one thing to that point of, can I say I hate it? I think one of the themes that really hit me at the end, kind of throughout, because at first she has this, it features a lot of like her inner dialogue. Like, what does she really want to say when she runs into the mother at the grocery store who's like, oh, you must be so happy to be home with your child. And she has this, like, they vocalize what she's thinking in her head, which is basically like, it's the worst. I'm awful. I haven't slept in years. Like, I have no idea what I am. I'm having existential angst every day. And then the arc of, by the end of the film, she's able to express a little bit outwardly what's going on with her, whether it's sharing it with her husband or sharing it with her friends. And for her, sharing it through her art. And I've thought about that. I struggle with this too. There's a scene in the movie where she's, well, at the end, oh no, there's a crisis moment between her and her husband, who I would say in the first half of the movie is like a total like dud of a husband, like just absent, not emotionally supportive, doesn't really engage with the kids, like is very hands-offy. But she kind of is coming to realize for her what it means that she isn't painting or being acting as an artist anymore, and is totally consumed by her child and is frustrated and lost. And she kind of shouts this at the husband, and he's like, I had no idea that you were feeling this way. Like, if I'd known, I would have done something, or I would have done something differently, or we could have talked about it differently. And I do find that talking about motherhood, again, I think particularly in the early years where it's so intense, at least my experience is that it's so intense. The feelings that I have about it feel either huge joy or like bitter resentment and angry. Like, it's hard to kind of level them out. But I think that for me makes it hard to talk about, because there are times where I hate it. And I think there probably are times where it's okay to say that you might hate it too.
Yeah.
And I love moments of it. And I never want to do anything else. And I want to do anything else but this.
Yeah.
And I think that it's hard for people that maybe aren't in that moment, aren't mothers of that age group, or haven't been parents, or are, not the primary mother. My fear is that they latch on to the one side of that, the emotional description of what the experience is of motherhood. And they'll say, oh, she hates it. And like, therefore she's miserable. And I think motherhood is such like a dynamic, endlessly evolving, always everything all the time thing, that I almost love that at the end, it features Amy Adams' character, kind of, spoiler alert, comes back around and turns a lot of this experience into art and an installation, and how it is something that like words kind of fall short, especially you take any one of them, you have to read the whole book, you have to like read the whole paragraph description. And I think because of that, it's hard to really talk about and hard to feel like an integrated, connected, full, rich experience, full dialogue, because I think there's also fear that if you say that it's hard and you hate it, also in like a potentially good way or with good intent, person on the receiving end, if that's a husband, a partner, whatever, is quick to think, oh my God, is she okay? Is something wrong? Do we need, therapy and intervention? As opposed
100%.
to, this is just
normal
part of the struggle. And I need to be able to say this out loud so that I don't
Yep.
feel it so much alone. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that when I said hate, I feel like that was such a subconscious thing that it came up and then I was like, ah,
I know.
right. And then there's fear of judgment or whatever. And it's like, of course, like, I don't hate this, whatever.
Yeah.
But there are such in the incredible moments, there's also then these difficulties, like you said, the moment of, oh my God, you must be so happy you get to spend all your time with him, blah, blah, blah. And then the internal dialogue of I'd also love to be able to go to the bathroom alone.
Yes.
And I'd love to have somebody not touch my body for a second.
Yes.
And I'd love to leave the house and not worry about what's going on back at home. Is everybody okay? You know?
Yes.
And I think that was one of the things that really resonated with me from the movie, was that it's there's so strong feelings and opinions and thoughts and complexities on both sides of this. Also, I loved the dynamic of the mom group. I've talked to you about recently joining a mom support group and having almost this weird, not I guess, reluctancy to join this, because I don't want being a mom or a caregiver to be my primary identity and whatever. And it felt almost, I don't know, not inauthentic, but if I go, then this is going to be, I don't know. It felt like a freshman year of college. We're all in this group, and the one thing we have in common is parenting, whatever. And I think I've gotten over that the past few weeks.
Well, and that's very much that the film reflects that, where Amy Adams in the early stages is basically feels the same way about joining this moms group or having any meaningful interactions with these moms at these library music classes, and is essentially proactively judgmental of them and being like, oh, they're just moms. And I do think that is an ongoing, and for myself too, of where, how is motherhood and being a mother, how does that show up in my identity? Is that who I am? Is that something I do? It's probably both, but especially in the early days, it's such at the forefront of who you are. And I think for anyone that has a strong I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I will blame this on my Aquarius zodiacness, whatever. But I have an independent streak. I can't even go to a yoga class because I'm everyone else around me is doing the same thing. So I'm not saying I'm normal, but to kind of highlight it by sharing the extreme version, where I just don't like going along with the crowd. And I think one thing that was helpful in this movie too, where she talks about, the character says, Amy, I always thought motherhood was a weak state of being. But then she says it's dynamic and violent. Mother loves the child with the most powerful love in the universe. And also tries to and the child immediately tries to kill the mother, by being birthed. It's such a violent act. So trying to, and again, going back to the point of this podcast, is I think that there aren't the discussion of mothers and motherhood is so infantilizing and mommying. And I think that, and it doesn't speak to the power and the kind of for me, especially if you can't see it or hear it, it's hard to know that it's true. I think the role modeling here needs to get better of what being a mom looks like, and also have a longer trajectory of okay, these next months, I'm a mommy mom. I'm at those groups, but that doesn't mean that that's all I am and that's all I'll ever be. It's just sort of an initial entry point. And I did love that for those mothers, when Amy played the role of articulating the challenges and frustrations of motherhood, that for them, I loved in the movie, they held there was a, no pun intended, but obviously intended, a pregnant pause between when she says something controversial in the America Ferrera speech that happened in Barbie, where she's just ranting about the reality of being a woman in society. There are many moments of that for Amy where she's articulating what hasn't been shared publicly, seemingly, but every mother's thinking, and how the mothers on the receiving end wait and then suddenly are like, you're right. How am I going to have another child? Or you're right. Like maybe we are powerful. I don't know. Like it's a very, and obviously that's the connection and community that everyone needs, but particularly in this state of parenting where you just feel so alone.
And you feel scared to say what you're actually feeling until you say it. And then someone else is like, me too.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, this is very timely. The other night, there had been some drinking involved, so this might have influenced the outcome.
Girl.
But we somehow, Jason and I, husband and I, were awake with the kids towards the end of the evening, and suddenly popped up like all of these old videos of like baby videos. And the kids are loving to see them. And so it's me with each kid. Mostly it's typically either videos that were taken when one or the other parent was away, which then ultimately made it seem like, was mom ever home? It's like, or was dad ever home? But all these, baby videos being there with the kids. And I cried. I suddenly I found it so poignant and like beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. But I was crying just remembering how alone I felt in a way that I just sort of powered through at the time. But now maybe in this funny new state of whatever era phase I'm in, but thinking back about how hard that was and how lonely that was and how trying so hard to find joy and meaning in a baby being able to hold a rattle for the first time, and just how I kind of cried for myself in a weird way. Like, and not that I was abandoned by any stretch of the imagination. I have an incredible husband and family around me. So almost to say like, for the luckiest of us, we still feel alone. And out of that actually came an interesting parenting moment where when Jason sees me distressed about anything, but particularly about a kid related thing, he's very defensive of me. And our oldest was less in tune to what I was experiencing and was a little more like, hey mom, can you get me some lemonade? And I'm just like, like bawling in the corner. I'm like, okay, I'll get it for you. But anyway, Jason was to get him to get this and use the wrong words, but was trying to say the right thing, which he was like, mom is kind of remembering, I'm probably going to cut this, but basically saying like the burden of raising you. She's kind of reliving that. And I was like, alarm bells went off and I was like, no burden, like not a burden, hard, and also a great privilege and a beautiful thing, but maybe also kind of a burden. Like I wouldn't want to say that to my kid, but I don't know. It was a fully messy reality experience and I'm sharing it because we are.
Because it's real.
Raw.
Also, I think that there is something like this emotional side of the loss of, well, especially you having 3 children, the loss of Sara before and after one child and then the next. And it's the transformation and the loss of who that was, and not necessarily in a bad way, but the components of you who don't exist now that did when you had only one kid or when you had no kids.
Yeah.
And that's very real. And there is, burden makes it seem bad in the same way that hate makes it seem bad, but it's not that. It's just the change and discomfort and the obstacles and challenges, and that's okay.
Yes. Yes. I did, for all the therapists listening, I did circle back the next morning with our son and was like, I just wanted to flag what was said.
You are not a burden.
And also clarify, it's really important to me that you know and believe me when I tell you that you are not a burden. Yes. Raising you was not a burden. It will never be a burden. It was the greatest honor. And it was hard sometimes, and also really fun and awesome. But like it was hard. And I do think that's like useful. Again, you got to like have all angles on it. But it was, I think, part of what I was feeling emotional about in this phase of life, particularly post kind of like rediscovering a different identity or moving into different directions professionally / personally and reflecting on what really matters to me. That how I think I was really hit with the identity component of being a mother to young babies and how that really felt like a loss of who I thought I was and wanted to continue to be, but I guess didn't have. When you have an infant at home, you can't do all of those things, even basic things. Like for me, running and exercise as a former athlete is like very core to like identity, and also just objectively from a scientific perspective helps me feel better.
Mhm.
And not being able to do that for all sorts of good reasons really made me, and that's probably the least important element of it, but not being able to do that and express myself as someone who really like holds on to her individualism was really hard. And I think I was sad for, it's also sad for the woman that couldn't really talk about that. And I think it's one of the reasons I feel so forever connected with you was that you were the person that I was kind of in it with on a more emotional level. And I think maybe even more over time, even after you were working with us, like we could talk about
Yeah.
um, who we each are and were. And we have these kids climbing all over us. Which does, not to, well, maybe intentionally to bring it back to the movie, but one of the scenes was Amy Adams is out to dinner with her grad school
Mm.
friends who are the worst and just very pretentious. Most of them don't have kids, except for at least one who vocalized it, where Amy Adams specifically called her out and was like, tell me about, how are you doing with your kids? And she said, I'm quoting this. She says, I'm a better mom because of my work. I haven't
Mm.
lost myself, but
Mhm.
specifically because she says she
Support.
couldn't do it without her nanny, Christy,
Mhm.
which I really think it's when in many versions of like trying to debrief on this movie, I get emotional just thinking about the role that you played in my life, that it really is, yes, you carried our kids. I mean, not pregnancy wise, just to clarify.
You're welcome.
But you
I
were
was your
there,
surrogate.
like exactly. You were there triaging our baby, and also like I feel like I was on life support. Like there's really what you did, the work that you did to care for the baby that gave me a little airtime to care for myself, that gave me time to put myself back together physically and mentally. That is invaluable. Like I can't really constantly always think about how with any form of meaningful childcare, how I feel so protective of it and defensive of it, because I'm like, I am not me without you, or without that person, without that support. I am not myself. I would have died. And I do think that's true. I think even with this Amy Adams character, my read was she only started kind of recovering-ish herself when she had they had a temporary separation with her husband. So her husband was watching the kid at his own
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
She had a day on a recurring basis to herself, and she was sleeping again. And
Mhm.
that only then was she able to kind of remember and get that spark a little bit of the
Right.
things that were hers. And not to say that it means she needs to be doing that full time. And I will talk about all this stuff more, but the importance of getting a chance to do the little things that made you feel like yourself, and also knowing that over time you'll have more of those moments, that is like everything in terms of like psychology and health coming out of having a baby. And
Yeah.
I am so endlessly grateful to you.
Love you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so wild now being able to reflect on my own experience, having a child, knowing how vulnerable and raw you were when I met you, and
Yeah.
how like you were able to trust me and say, yeah, okay, I will let you into my home. I will let you help me with the most fragile human being who needs someone else to exist and quite literally do anything, and see me in these moments where I'm just desperately trying to find myself and take care of myself and this new baby and figure out who I am as an individual and a partner and a mom, whatever.
Yeah.
And honestly, that was like, I mean, in the moment, I knew that it was a big deal, but now even reflecting on it, it's such an honor to be able to be there, to be able to still have a relationship with you, to be able to learn from you, and to just experience that. Because I wouldn't be who I am now without that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And it's all hard. And it's, you know,
It's life.
scary. And it's exactly, yeah. It's like, and it's also just life.
Yeah.
And we're all just figuring it out for the first time. And we're all doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And how cool and lucky are we that we get to like do this with one another. I think that we're not, you know, it can be so isolating and scary and lonely parenting, and becoming a mom. And especially, you know, if you have a partner who is working and you're home during the day with the baby.
Yeah.
But then remembering that we are not meant to do this alone,
Yes.
and opening up to people and being vulnerable and raw and saying, yeah, it would be awesome if you held my baby while I showered or did something for
Yeah.
myself. That is not weakness or whatever. That is imperative and actually
Yes.
makes you human and a
Yes.
better person, you know?
Yes. Yes. And that brings me to what I found like deeply emotional at the end of the movie. So throughout the film, there are a lot of like flashbacks to her own mother and a little bit of a parallel storyline where her mother, in Amy Adams' recollection, sort of sacrificed this big career as a singer, potentially. Who knows what that actual path would have looked like.
Sure.
But a moment where she could have moved to France to sing, but instead she stayed home. She didn't do that because she had kids. And a sort of warning that I had absorbed about becoming a parent was the risk of being a mother with unfulfilled dreams or regrets about something, and how that's detrimental to the mother, but also passing that along to the kids, and then they feel like they were the problem and they ruined this person's
Sure.
life. But at the end of the movie, once Amy Adams has kind of gone through her arc, and I'm not saying it's like, and then she's fine and it's great, but she kind of fights to recover a sense of her identity. She's making art again. And then there's this voiceover where she's like, I wish I could go back to my mom and like shake her and say, insist on your own joy. It makes me cry even to think about it now. Insist on your own joy and don't do it just for you, like do it for me too. And I do think for me, clearly, that's such a powerful sentiment of whether your joy is 5 minutes with your feet up reading Us Weekly, or your joy is 3 hours a day writing a novel, or your joy is working 9 to 5 at a corporate company, or your joy is painting on the weekends, for like or showering. And it will change over time. But I think women, mothers, there's such a heavy gravitational pull or an existing current that will just pull your whole self into your kids and your role within the family. And that's beautiful. And many people thrive there. But I also think even those who do, they need to find ways to insist on their own joy and insist on what's important to them. And it's so hard to insist when you're in it, because there isn't time or space to insist. And women in general don't want to take up time or space. So I think, to me, especially as I was pursuing, a more creative alternative existence professionally and feeling like this is selfish, but that message of insisting on your own joy, I think, is something that I thought was profound and is something that I admire and see. Like, the mothers that I admire particularly are able to do that. They insist on their own joy, but not at the expense of everyone else. Like, they find a way to integrate all of this. And that's something that I'm hoping that we can highlight in this podcast over time, of like, and maybe this becomes like one of our standing questions, like, in what ways are you insisting on your own joy still? Because I do think that's a lifeblood. Yes, there we go. Wait, who said that one?
That was my Instagram bio for
yeah,
like a decade.
yes.
But it's true. Where are you finding your little things of joy?
Yes.
Like where little or big. And it doesn't have to be these monumental things. It doesn't mean, and it's not selfish. It's imperative in order to your existence and sanity.
Yes.
And we all need to do it and should do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I also think even before you throw kids in the picture, I want to hear if people disagree with me, but I think that, I don't know. Is this true? This is true for me, at least. I think I have a harder time knowing what joy is for me. Yeah. I have a harder time knowing what joy is for me on my own. My joy is very tied up in doing it with someone else or participating in someone else's joy. But what are the things realistically that I could continue to do? And maybe this was my own journey of like soccer for me was joy. But at a certain point, there weren't opportunities to play, or maybe I didn't insist enough. But that kind of fell away. I can't just go outside and like jump into an 11v11 game. Like, there's a lot to facilitate to make it happen, but it's almost like hobbies. Like, I needed to find something. I think Shout out to anyone thinking about having a kid. Before you have a kid, don't worry about like accomplishing all your like professional achievements or anything related to that. Worry about finding one hobby that you can do by yourself, like puzzling, like something that's small and brings you joy. I feel like it's such a comfort. Like people that knit. I don't know. You're good at this stuff, Fee, but I'm not good at those small, big joy hobby things. But I think that's such a lifeline, especially early days of having a kid.
Yes. Also, this reminds me, similar train of thought, whatever, but that in these moments when you're in the thick of it, and I realized I am guilty of doing this, finding time for yourself is not going and doing laundry or going and taking a shower. Those are basic necessities.
Yes.
Like those are like, that is not time to yourself. Or, you know, can you hold the baby so I could go cook dinner or whatever? That's
Right.
not this.
Yeah.
This is, yes, finding something that fulfills you and brings you joy and happiness and comfort and relaxation, whatever. There's a difference between going to shower and like finding your hobby or your activity.
Yes, totally. Man. What are the other themes? What have we not hit? I feel like there's so many angles on this.
I know.
What was the critique? What you said you'd done, like read some criticisms of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, well, we talked about this a bit before, but the representation of partners in the movie and how there's kind of ends up, it shows default parent, which is the mother, and then the not active or I don't know what another
not
word
proactive.
to describe. Yeah, just like ill-involved father.
Yeah, a passenger. Yeah.
So there was a lot of criticism around that. But I also, it's so interesting. I don't know why it's so polarizing. I'm like, this is just such an accurate representation of how hard it is to be a mother. And I'm not really sure why anybody thinks otherwise.
Yeah. And let's be curious about why as opposed to judging so harshly. Yeah.
I think I wonder if the criticism comes from people feeling scared to admit how real it is and like, oh, it's not that hard or, oh, it's not this or that. And it's like, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And if you acknowledge that, then are you saying that this isn't as easy as you make it seem or want it to seem to other people? Or do you feel guilty for feeling those feelings?
Yeah. Yeah. I also feel that there's a lot of pressure to somehow live out a perfectly equitable, empowered woman dynamic in a family once you have kids. And I think one thing my dad actually said to me, just this idea that it's not fair. Like the experience of raising kids, being in a marriage is not about fairness. Like if the expectation is that it's equal in every way all the time, that each of you does 20 minutes a day of laundry, each of you does 20 minutes a day of dishes, each of you, I don't know, goes to work and is away from the kids for the same 7.5 hours, like all of that. Like it's just not, I think the more that there's that level of comparison and the expectation of that feels to me like you're setting yourself up for failure. But instead, being able to communicate your needs and have them be received with, I don't know, open heart, open mind sounds so cheesy, but I find myself when I ask for things that sit within the sort of classic mother camp, I often feel I like hate having to ask about them. Like, could you go get more diapers? You know what I mean? I like feel so annoying, but I think just being able to openly ask for what you need and have that ask be delivered and received not as a criticism or as someone's not doing their job or whatever, but have that be received as here's as a collective, we as a team need, here's what's useful for all of us, I think is super helpful. And that I think in this case, in the movie, my life husband, I have an incredible husband who is very in tune and very much wants to help and very more than I am is an elevator of me and the role of women and mothers. And still, we have times where it feels imbalanced. And still, sometimes I find myself falling into classic gendered roles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's complicated is they actually, I think I want to say they're not, it doesn't have to be temporary forever. It doesn't have to like mean these are gendered roles. And I think this is what many academics will challenge me on. But like, do I want this because I want this? Or is this feel good because it feels good? Or is this the patriarchy told you this is what normal looks like? So of course it feels good to you. But I will take the lead on home stuff, the psychology of our kids, the wellness of them. Jason's very present, but I kind of am the lead parent on that front. He's the lead parent on our finances, like that kind of stuff, which always feels like uncomfortable to say out loud because that's sort of like have I let down all versions of like the feminist movement that came before? But I think ultimately that's supposed to be about choice and
I was going to say, if you're
lack of judgment.
then there's the power in that. It's not relinquishing it because you feel as though you have to.
Yeah.
And then if you didn't, are you doing that just to make a statement and a point to say,
I know,
fuck the patriarchy, I'm going to do this?
I know. I think the real like unraveling question is, does that role for now feel like my strength? Because I often say like, let's just play to your strengths. Like he's great at that, so let him do that. I'm great at this, let me do that. But is my strength this because of the society in which I live, and because I wound up in a career that was lucrative and meaningful, but wasn't? He made more money than I did. You know what I mean? Like, is that where is my agency? But anyway, I think that's true for so many questions. Like, how are we nature versus nurture, whatever. Yes, we cannot all be pure. But what feels good in this moment? And I think the point is like, if this role no longer feels good, which showed up in the movie too, she said like, I agreed at the time to like kind of put my career on hold and be with the kids full time. But I didn't realize what I was giving up in doing so. And that no longer works for me. Like the fact that that was like a rough way to have that conversation. But ultimately that idea that we are all evolving and growing, and just because it's working then doesn't mean it's always working, and growing and evolving as a couple, as parents, as a family, all that stuff. Again, I think like being able to communicate the good and the bad and to hear both without overreacting to either is so important, and supporting the human that is raising the kid or managing the finances or whatever, that we're all doing so much. So, and I do agree that I think the role model, the husband was redeemed to me in the end, but it was such an extremely lame version of a husband along the way. But again, maybe they made it so obvious so that everyone could get it.
Yeah. Did they have to dumb it down to make it consumable?
Yeah. Totally.
Or make it so painfully obvious. So,
yeah. The other one I was thinking of was about how this was categorized as a horror film and whether that felt necessary. And actually, it did turn me off from wanting to watch it right off the bat. But and then being like, are we saying that childhood, raising a newborn is
horrific,
a horror movie?
And scary?
Yeah.
Which, like, not true. But I think that similar, to your point, I had to, when I convinced anybody else to watch it, I was like, it's not a horror movie. It's not scary. It's not jump scare. It's scary because it's real. And it's scary because it's like, wow, that is accurate. It's an accurate depiction of, plus the added features of the growing a tail.
Right.
Or,
Yes. And there was also thinking about how being in that state of newbornness is such a primal experience, and maybe it's particularly difficult because we're trying to be in this primal state but also exist in a civilized quote unquote society and show up clean and easy. And there's something that just is like such a release to be like, I'm gonna be a fucking dog for a while. I'm not gonna wash my hair, I'm not gonna brush my teeth, my kid's gonna sleep in a dog sack next to my bed. You know what I mean?
Which I also was like, genius.
Yes, I know. I actually thought about you with that setup. I was like, this might be perfect. Yeah. But the end of last time too, you said this, which is that I think the importance of being honest and sharing the full experience versus a one-off quip about parenting sucks, you know what I mean? And being able to, almost a responsibility for the listener to be curious about, even if all they heard was it's hard, to be like, what is hard about it? Why is it hard? And on the communicating side, like be able to try to like fight to share the full experience as much as we can. Maybe just come on our podcast. We will make you share the full experience. Okay, cool. We did it. What else do we say?
Look at us.
Yes. And my other takeaway is forever. I almost think this should be like on our sign off, but like insist on your own joy.
I love that.
I love it. I love it. It's very much what you said to me when I was like on the ground crying before, like in the midst of trying to see if we could pull together this podcast. And I was like, I can't even do this. Should I even be doing this? And you were like, you need to do this. It's very,
and you are doing it.
And look at us doing it. So for future episodes, I feel like we'll keep chatting about stuff like this. We'll find points. I don't know. What do we call them? Stimuli?
Mm-hmm.
Stimulus?
I do like maybe our go-to question, though, is where's your joyfulness? Like asking people, like, where do you find, what's your thing that you do for you?
Yes.
Where's your joy? I do like that.
I also was thinking about asking people, how do they think of who they were before they had a child versus who they are now? Who were you then and who are you now, in the sense of like, has your identity totally changed? Yeah. And I'm also curious among mothers who are early days versus mothers who are further out, like if they have bigger perspective on who they were then, how that's changed. Like I'm very curious about that. Because if this whole thing is your sense of identity is at least rocked, whether it's totally destroyed or not, who knows? I'm curious where people rebuild to. Like, do people end up, is moving through motherhood a process of coming home? Is that something that everyone does regardless of kids? Like, are you growing up and growing back into yourself? I don't know.
Right. It's interesting. I'm curious to see if I am too close to it right now, because truly, if you ask me who was I, I'm like,
I know. You're doing so much.
Clue.
The fact that you're here, thanks. The fact that you juggled everything you juggled, the fact that you have like lipstick on and have coherent thoughts. Like I can't.
Thanks, girl.
I can't do that now. And you're doing it with a baby pooping on you.
He's asleep now, so.
Oh, good. Now let's start.
No, truly. I'm like, can we start over?
All right. For everyone out there, keep on fighting the good fight. Thank you for listening.
We love you. You're doing great.
Yes, exactly. This whole thing is going to be a journey. We're all on a journey. But we got this team. For those who care to like and subscribe, please like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
Also, continue to nominate guests or general ideas and feedback. info@themothersmedia.co. We'll eventually start showing up on the socials, which unfortunately I think now has to include TikTok again. I don't know. I kind of hope it doesn't. I feel like the farthest I can go is Instagram. I don't know. But we'll start showing. We'll be everywhere soon. And yeah, thanks for helping us insist on our own joy. Everyone out there, insist on your own joy. Go us.
We did it.
We did it.
We're so brave.
I know. Are we going to publish it? Let's hope so. Damn it. Where's my production team?
All right. Someone edit it. Thank you.